Folks, I am so excited to welcome for the first time on As the World Churns, but not the first time on one of my co-hosted podcasts, Glenn Kirschner. I am so excited to have you. He's the host of Justice Matters. You know him as a 30-year federal prosecutor vet, and understand that for, I don't know, Glenn, I guess maybe a decade now, you, like me, have been yelling from the rooftops, trying to have people understand our power as it pertains to the rule of law, as it pertains to the Constitution. You worked for the Department of Justice, you worked in government. I want to say this: we are now past the 100-day mark. We are now, I guess, 3+ months into this second regime. You and I spoke ad nauseum during the first Trump regime. For you, how is this first 100 days plus this first quarter of the Trump regime sitting different from you, if at all, from the
Mhm.
first time around?
Yeah, we didn't know what to expect the first time around, but I think we knew what to expect the second time around, and what we got is about 1,000 times worse. It's like destruction of the rule of law and the Constitution on steroids and speed and crystal meth and, some Thunderbird wine, which is the only thing I ever partook in with respect to all those other things. But can I also say, first of all, welcome on As the World Churns. You could have gone with As It Burns, As It Disintegrates, As It falls apart. But as you said, Danielle, you and I have been doing this virtually since I retired from the Department of
Yes.
Justice. It's
Yes.
been years and years. And I appreciate, first of all, that I've been able to plug into you since leaving government because, you are a relentless and fierce and fearless and tireless democracy warrior. And that's why I so appreciate your voice and why I'm so thrilled that we've been doing this together
Yes.
for years,
For
although it
years.
seems with relatively little results. But you know what? We're going to keep fighting because fuck them. They cannot hold us down, right? So here's how I see the first 100+ days. I mean, he is so unhinged and unconstrained by the rule of law and the Constitution. And when Republican appointed judge, one after another, many Reagan appointed judges, many Trump appointed judges are saying to him, look, sport, what you're doing is blatantly unconstitutional. It's clear that he doesn't care and
Yep.
he's going to continue doing it. I happen to believe the federal courts are holding strong. I don't like the pace of the Abrego Garcia contempt matter that
Mm-hmm.
will end, I believe, in Trump administration officials being held in contempt. Judge Boasberg in the Venezuelan deportation matter is sort of moving forward in a very slow, methodical, careful contempt arena, all of which
Mm-hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
necessary. I do hope it comes to the point where Trump administration officials are jailed for their contempt of court. All of that, I think, is about the best we can hope for from the federal court and the federal judges. They're standing up, they're holding strong. But Danielle, as you and I were discussing before you started the video rolling, I am almost rooting for Donald Trump to drag America off the cliff of the constitutional crisis because at that moment, and he's come close and he's inching toward the edge of the cliff, but because of the Supreme Court's mealy mouthed decision in the Abrego Garcia case, well, we want you to facilitate, but we don't want you to effectuate. We want you to kind of think about and plan to bring him back, but we don't want to interfere with the administration's foreign policy prerogatives. What a bunch of utter garbage and doublespeak and weak ass bullshit. That's a
Mm-hmm.
legal term, at
It's a
least in,
legal
in
term.
New
I use it all
Jersey.
the time.
In New Jersey, where I come from, that's a legal term. Um, and so the problem is that case has got to go back up, and they have to set a damn judicial line in the sand and say,
Mm-hmm.
no, return him to the United States and give him his due process rights by the 1st of July or whatever. And then when Donald Trump says F you to the Supreme Court, the benefit of that will be him announcing, I am ending the constitutional construct of our government. I no longer am a legitimate president of the United States to the extent he was ever a legitimate president of the United States because I do not recognize the Constitution's separation of powers, checks and balances, co-equal branches of government. I say F it all. And the moment he does that, he's no longer a legitimate president abiding by our constitutional construct. And that will give others liberty to do what, in fact, not just liberty or permission, it will demand that they do what they must do, whether it's impeachment, whether it's the military not taking unlawful orders from a president who has announced he's no longer legitimate and not doing what he will call the military to do to keep him in power, which I believe is coming if
Mhm.
we
Mhm.
continue on
Mhm.
this path. So, my wife and I go back and forth on this every day. She gets very upset every time there's a new Trump outrage, understandably so. She had her rights as a woman revoked in 1979 and lived through the revolution in Iran.
Mhm.
So she's been there in very real terms. I view it a little bit differently. Bring on the abuse of power and abuse of office and unconstitutionality because you are basically writing your own political demise in the long run. I know that is
Yeah. Yeah.
relatively small hook on which to hang our hope right now, but that's the way I see this potentially playing out if his unconstitutional conduct continues unabated.
So let me ask you a couple of things. First is this week, right? Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, is on Capitol Hill, and she said very unequivocally, um, it is within the president's right to decide if he's going to suspend habeas corpus. Stephen Miller has uttered the same thing in the White House press briefing room. This has been something that has been circulating, and it is part and parcel as to why they've continued to use terms like invasion, why they've continued to use terms that are to conjure the idea that we are at war with these unruly, undocumented immigrants that are coming into this country, and that you must be able to suspend, right, habeas corpus. You must be able to suspend due process in order to relieve America from this invasion. This is how they're using this language, and that's why they use the Alien Enemies Act that they resurrected. Talk to me about what we need to understand about the suspension of habeas corpus and the idea that it's being floated around as a deep possibility, right? I have mainstream corporate media saying, oh, could he? Couldn't he? As if the Constitution is just an idea as opposed to a document that this country has been ruled by for nearly 250 years. So, talk to us about the chilling effects of that hearing, what she said, uttering the same talking points as Stephen Miller, and then the reaction that there has been from the media.
Yeah, there are no two sides to this issue of whether a president has the lawful and constitutional authority to suspend the great writ, the writ of habeas corpus, and we'll define that in a minute. And unfortunately, the media is forever engaged in anti-journalism, where I was a journalism major undergrad, and my mentor was the storied investigative reporter, Clark Mollenhoff for the Des Moines Register, who was also a special counsel to President Richard Nixon until Nixon went rogue during Watergate, and then Clark Mollenhoff turned on him like a damn pit bull. And that is who taught me journalism. Today, apparently, mainstream media, corporate media, legacy media believes that presenting two sides of an issue is giving equal time to the truth and a lie. That's not what journalism is all about. And I walked away from MSNBC after 6.5 years, and I'm not criticizing my friends and colleagues at MSNBC, but the first thing cable news seems to do is put up Donald Trump's outrageous, lie-filled, hateful posts, which why are you
Advertising?
why are you making that the marquee moment in your news coverage? And then maybe they try to contradict the lies and maybe they don't. But what the people come away with is, ooh, look at Donald Trump said he can suspend the writ of habeas corpus. Not that he has said that, but that's an example.
No.
So anyway, I got sidetracked there. There are no two sides to this issue. It's not a debate. Where do we see in the Constitution the possible suspension of the writ of habeas corpus? In Article 1, potential powers and limitations on the power of Congress. Has nothing to do with the president. The president does not have the authority to unilaterally suspend the writ of habeas corpus. But let's talk about what it means in layman's terms, and real people speak, not legalese. So because the courts have told Donald Trump, hey, guess what, sport? You can't deport anybody, including immigrants, without giving them due process of law. What does due process mean? It means you got to give them advance notice that you're going to try to stuff them on a plane and send them to a prison in a far off land. Advance notice of at least 21 days and perhaps longer. You have to let them get a lawyer. You have to let them go to court, and you have to give them an opportunity to be heard. Due process doesn't have an intuitive meaning. What due process is adequate notice to somebody that the government is about to act against, and an opportunity to go into court, be heard with the assistance of counsel, and tell the judge why you're not susceptible to deportation or detention. Because Donald Trump doesn't like the fact that a judge gets to make this decision, not him. He
Right.
tried to make it by stuffing those Venezuelan immigrants on the plane without
Right.
honoring their constitutional rights. And let me just answer a question that is often raised. Don't only American citizens have constitutional rights? No. The Fifth Amendment says person. You can't deprive a person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And the Supreme Court has affirmed that over and over and over and over. Again, it doesn't matter if you're here without status. It doesn't matter if you're here illegally. You get due process notice and opportunity to be heard. So because Donald Trump hasn't found a way around that, he wants to basically add unconstitutional conduct on top of unconstitutional conduct by saying, well, then if I can't get around notice and opportunity to be heard, I'm going to suspend the very vehicle that gives people the opportunity to fight for notice
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to be heard, which is the writ of habeas corpus, the great writ. Loosely translated, it's when the government is unlawfully or unconstitutionally detaining, jailing, imprisoning somebody pending deportation or otherwise. The writ of habeas corpus, loosely translated, is the court commanding the government, bring the body of the prisoner before me so I can decide
Mm-hmm.
whether you
Mm-hmm.
have a lawful and constitutional basis to detain and ultimately deport this person. So Donald Trump couldn't get around due process, so he's trying to get around it with another unconstitutional act. I'm going to suspend the writ of habeas corpus. Well, sport, you can't. You can't. And don't take it from me. Take it from Justice Antonin Scalia. Read his opinion, which says the president, the executive, doesn't have the power to suspend the writ of habeas corpus. Sandra Day O'Connor, the president doesn't have that authority or power under the Constitution. Article 1 says, the Congress may suspend the writ of habeas corpus in the event of an invasion into the United States, which contemplates a military force from another country invading. Think Pearl Harbor.
Right.
That's when the writ
Right.
was suspended. This ain't Pearl Harbor. We're not being invaded. There is no rebellion. That's the other basis, invasion or rebellion. The only rebellion we've come close to was on January 6th,
Right.
right? When people tried to unconstitutionally negate a presidential election's results. So they can't do it. It cannot lawfully or constitutionally be done, period. Not by the president for sure. And Scalia and Sandra Day O'Connor have told presidents that in their opinions, and not by the Congress, because you don't have that predicate. We're not being invaded, and there is no rebellion.
Let me ask you this, though, because here's the thing. What I have come to understand through your tutelage and through just living through the last nearly 10 years under Trumpism, because this summer, Glenn, it will be 10 years since that man came down the escalator. And it is just shocking, right, to realize how much time has passed and how little we as a country have learned how to combat this type of autocrat, this type of egomaniac. But I say this because you say it can't be done. The Constitution says so. Congress would only have the authority to do so. The Supreme Court and past members have said so. But we are living in unconstitutional times,
Yes.
right? While the judge said you need to bring back those Venezuelan people that you abducted, that you kidnapped and sent to this foreign gulag, they're still there,
Yeah.
right? Abrego Garcia, who a judge ruled and said he should never have been removed. You need to facilitate his return. He's still in an El Salvadorian prison. We have only seen a trickle in terms of the release of those that have been unlawfully detained. Rumzia Arzark was just released. Khan Suri, a Georgetown academic, just released. Mahmoud Khalil still being detained. So I say all this to say, because you're right, in terms of what the rule of law states. But we have been living over the last 10 years. Donald Trump has been pulling back, pulling back, pulling back on what we even understand our liberties to be, and putting into question and sowing just a bit of doubt, right, about how far a president can actually go, to the tune that the Supreme Court said, go all the way, buddy. You got it. Here's the green light. So, with just the couple of minutes that we have remaining, is your feeling then that, is this the bridge too far? Because I'm 16 bridges back and they've all been burned.
Yeah. All we can do, Danielle, is continue to scream from the flippin' rooftops about what the rule of law says, what the Constitution allows and does not allow. And part of the reason we never give up talking about how our government is required to behave under our Constitution is because as each unconstitutional act, as they multiply, it is gonna be up to the people to, come out and insist that, "Okay, this dictator's gotta go." And so what we can't say is, "Well, when is it gonna end?" We don't know. I mean, we just talked about a scenario where it may end with the military being called in by Donald Trump to be turned against the citizenry, to try to keep him in office once the calls for his resignation or impeachment become just too overwhelming, too loud, too persistent by too many. He'll try to use the military to keep himself in power. And I can tell you how things are supposed to work when that moment hits. And I hope it doesn't hit, but it does look increasingly likely that it will hit. And it's what I learned in officer basic training before I entered active duty. It's what I learned again at the Army JAG school before I started prosecuting court martial cases. The military must obey lawful orders, but more importantly, they must disobey unlawful orders. And when Donald Trump announces himself as a dictator who will no longer abide by the Constitution or by Supreme Court rulings, orders, and directives, that's when we no longer have a president whose orders will be lawful. They will be unlawful. And that's when the military will have to step up and do what the military is taught to do by pledging loyalty and allegiance to the Constitution, not to a dictator. And I hope that's not the way this thing resolves itself, but I do believe it will resolve itself one way or another.
Mhm.
But we can't, with any sort of level of confidence or assurance, say, okay, this is the way this is going to play out, because this precise kind of autocracy, dictatorship, oligarchy has never taken hold in America the way it has taken hold under Donald Trump. So we are all just spitballing here, but we'll keep talking about what the rule of law and the Constitution requires, indeed demands of a president. Because if we stop talking about that, as
Yeah.
frustrating as it is, because you and I are like, yeah, but he ain't doing it. I understand that. We just got to keep screaming it from the rooftops and marching and marching and marching.
Glenn Kirschner, my friend, we will leave it here today. I can't thank you enough for continuing to yell from the rooftops and continuing to remind people that there are not a lot of things in life that are black and white, but the rule of law, our Constitution, pretty clearly laid out, right? And there shouldn't be any doubt that is there, that is able to take hold. So we appreciate you and hope to have you back on As the World Churns soon.
I'll see you soon, Danielle.